But without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you award-winning author and Social Day opening keynote, Patrick Fagan. Welcome, Patrick, everybody.
All right, hello. Today, sorry, I can't see my slides. Thank you. Today I'll be talking about what I call the 3 Fs: food, faces, and sex, and some other things in terms of how to make content noticeable, attention-grabbing, and memorable. So just to introduce myself quickly, my name's Patrick, although sometimes I go by Pat because research says it makes me more likable. People with a short name or a nickname tend to be seen as more popular and cheerful, which is where I think I can use the most help. So that's the kind of thing I do as a behavioral scientist, is take this kind of academic science side of psychology and actually practically apply it for real world challenges and results. So on the academic side, I'm a part-time lecturer at a couple of universities. I publish papers on things from Facebook psychology to facial expressions. And I have a book called Hooked, which is about the psychology of effective communications. So how do you grab attention? By, for example, putting a cute puppy on the front of the book or in your advert, because we're evolutionarily hardwired to immediately pay attention to cute things. So basically, this book is what I'm going to be talking about today in terms of how to hook people, how to grab their attention and engage them. So I'll start a little bit with kind of primer on behavioral science, a bit of background. So I'll start with this nice, memorable experiment that shows just how much the subconscious rules our behavior without us knowing it or sometimes controlling it. In this study, participants were brought into a room and told to wait for the experiment to start, but they didn't know it actually had started already and they were being secretly filmed. And what they found was after the researchers shook their hand, they would then surreptitiously touch their face, especially around the nose, as you can see. And what they were doing was sniffing their hand, because when you shake someone's hand, there's a transference of kind of pheromones through sweat, which tell you about kind of genetic fitness, health status, maybe whether or not they've got coronavirus, that kind of thing. And we do this because we're what's known as cognitive misers. We have very limited brain power, essentially, to pay attention to things, to make decisions, to remember things, and so on. So you're probably aware of the kind of conscious, non-conscious split, but maybe you don't know just what the proportions are. So if you think about everything the brain can do in a second, how much of it do you think is conscious? Well, some neuroscientists were asked the same thing for a BBC documentary, but they were asked to draw it on a piece of paper.
Imagine that sheet of paper represents everything the brain can do. How much do you think is conscious and how much do you think is unconscious?
Wow, that's an interesting question.
How much is conscious and how much is not conscious? You're not serious. You are?
Now that's a very tricky thing to do.
That is very interesting.
I guess if I had to guess, I would say that if this is everything the brain can do, about this much is conscious.
I would say maybe have something like that out of the whole bit of paper.
I would say about this much is conscious.
So if this whole sheet of paper was... Okay.
Well, I will probably draw something small in the middle, like that, just to represent the conscious bit. That's my guess.
I have no idea.
Scientists agree that the role played by your conscious mind is much smaller than previously thought. Which raises a puzzling question. Are you in control of your unconscious? Or is it in control of you?
Well, in actual fact, you are your unconscious, but that's a topic for another day. The point being here that the vast majority of what our brain does happens without our conscious awareness or control. So you can't really put a number on that. You saw how difficult it was for them to draw it. But one researcher did try, and he looked at all of the neurons, the sensory neurons that fire in a second, finding there are 11 million in the brain, so everything you see and hear and feel. But only 40 of these go through conscious pathways. So only 0.0004% of everything your brain is processing in the world around you is being consciously recognized. So a nice analogy between these two systems, conscious and unconscious, is Kirk and Spock. Kirk is the emotional, hot-headed, does things quickly and intuitively, whereas Spock is kind of logical, cold, and takes his time. But just remember who the captain is. It's the emotional brain that tends to be in charge. And this is summarized nicely by this quote, where thought conflicts with emotion, the latter is designed by the neural circuitry in our brains to win. So the emotional brain has been around for longer, it's ensured our survival for longer, so it just tends to trump reason. So for example, hopefully it wasn't just me, but when I was a kid, I heard that if you kept your eyelids open when you sneezed and didn't blink, your eyeballs would pop out of your skull. Obviously, I tried to do it, but it's not possible. I couldn't use my conscious mind to stop that from happening any more than I could concentrate and stop my heart from beating. So the emotional brain tends to take precedence. And it's important to note that that's true even today, with all this amazing technology we have with the internet, computers, smartphones, etc. But what do we use it for? Pictures of cat videos and arguing with strangers. So even though we have this great technology, our motivations and our thinking processes and our biases are still very kind of evolutionarily hardwired and emotional. As evolutionary psychologists like to say, our modern skulls house a Stone Age brain. So most of what our brain is doing is that kind of monkey brain, that Stone Age brain. And just how limited our kind of so-called human conscious minds can be is illustrated nicely by this study where participants were asked to memorize a number. Now, half of them were given an easy number with 2 digits. The other half were given a harder number with 7 digits to memorize. And while they were keeping it in their memory, which is a difficult, taxing thing to do, in the second case, they were offered a snack, and they could either have cake or fruit. Now, under normal conditions, most people choose the fruit because that's the rational thing to do. It's good for you. Also, you're being kind of watched and observed by the researchers, so you want to look like you make sensible decisions. Probably, if you're by yourself, you might choose the cake. But when people were given the 7-digit number, most people chose the cake because their conscious minds were taxed, and as a result, that kind of impulsive, emotional monkey brain took over. And so there's a few implications of this, but one in particular I'm going to talk about now with respect to messaging. I'll show you a video. See how many times you can correctly count the players wearing white passing the ball to one another, and just see if you can get the number right.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half miss the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it, but did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
So we only have very limited attention spans, basically. So about half of people miss the gorilla. Another study found that about half of people fail to notice a unicycling clown when they're walking through a park. So we just don't have the brain power to consciously attend to everything. However, there are certain things that we will pay attention to. So I'll give you a personal story, and please try not to judge me too much, but I never used to give to charity. I do more now, but I never used to. And including I never used to buy the big issue. So I'd walk around London and you'd see the sellers a lot, but they just wouldn't kind of come up on my radar. Issue after issue, I just wouldn't notice and I wouldn't buy, and I'd walk on. Except one time, I did buy an issue, and I gave him £10. I said to keep the change. So there was something on the cover that really caught my attention. What was it? Well, I'll do a brief experiment with you. Just have a look at these images that come up on screen. They'll be there very quickly for less than a second, and just see which ones you notice or remember. Okay, and now what we call a distractor task. Back to my story. What was on the cover? Well, you may have heard of Bob the cat. Bob is a very cute cat who befriended a homeless person, and then the homeless person took him to the vet, and they became best friends. And the cat would follow him around everywhere while he was busking, without a need for a lead or anything, which anyone who has a cat knows is very unusual. And sometimes he'd wear a scarf, and Bob would follow him everywhere, even on the bus and things like that. So it was very cute and emotional and surprising. And that was enough to change Bob's life. So just having that cute cat there, people, as he said, it went crazy. People started interacting with him differently. He wrote a book, which became a bestseller, and then it even got turned into a nice Christmas movie. So the power of cuteness and emotion really changed his life. So cats or cute things are something that will immediately catch attention. Going back to the experiment, don't put your hand up because I won't see you, obviously. But I'll show you 3 images. 2 were on that original slide and 1 is new. Did you see a boat? Maybe, maybe not. Did you see a spider? Did you see a house? This experiment, as you can imagine, is more effective with a crowd of people putting their hand up, but most people see the spider because, again, it's one of those things that will instantly catch your attention for evolutionary reasons. You know, it could be dangerous, so our brain says, hey, that's important, pay attention to that. And there's this network then of regions in the brain that acts as a kind of bouncer or gatekeeper. It processes everything at a very low level and decides what you should give your limited conscious attention to. So imagine, for example, you're at a very noisy cocktail party, there's music, people talking, glasses clinking, and you're talking to some people, and then from across the room you hear someone say your name. You'll instantly pay attention to that, even though you weren't actively listening to their conversation. So your brain is processing all of those 11 million bits of noise around you at a very low level, and then directing your very limited conscious attention, those 40 bits, at your name when it hears it. And this might be why Coca-Cola had so much success putting names on cans and bottles, because if you see your name or the name of someone you know, you'll pay attention to it. So the bouncer has this kind of VIP list of things that we'll instantly pay attention to, and personal stuff like your own name is on that list. So using names in emails, letters, etc., is going to grab attention. Using pop culture things that people are familiar with, you know, popular songs, is going to grab attention because it's personal to everyone, counterintuitively. So personal things are on that VIP list. Also on that VIP list are emotional things. So I'll talk here quickly about cute things. In this study, people were tasked with playing Operation, where they have to very carefully remove pieces from the board without setting off the buzzer. Then they were shown some animals, and half the sample saw adult animals, the other half saw puppies and kittens. And then they played Operation again. And what they found was those who saw the puppies and kittens they not only did better the second time round, but they also spent more time on it, suggesting they were paying more attention and concentrating more. The authors suggest this is because we're evolutionarily hardwired to pay attention to cute things, because if we weren't, we wouldn't have looked after our babies and they would have been eaten by wolves. So this is why adverts with puppies, kittens, babies, etc. do so well. On the other side of the coin, we will pay attention to negatively emotional stuff. Fear is the strongest emotion, most likely to activate the amygdala. So in this study, people were much quicker to recognize a snake surrounded by mushrooms than they were to recognize a mushroom surrounded by snakes. In other words, scary stuff will immediately grab our attention. And this doesn't have to be kind of images, it can be words as well. So this study found that New York Times articles were much more likely to go viral if they contained the anger emotion. That was the strongest predictor. And that's not really a surprise to anyone who's familiar with the news cycle these days. Anger sells. So what else grabs our attention? Well, faces. If there's an image with a face in it, 80 or over 80% of the time, people will look at the face first before anything else. So adverts almost always have faces in, because, again, we're evolutionarily hardwired to instantly pay attention. But you can exploit this through emojis as well. So subject lines with emojis in my experience, are far more effective. Something else we'll instantly pay attention to is food. Here, people were much quicker to recognize a food object than a non-food object. And again, as you can imagine, there's an evolutionary value to that. And sex, again, using EEG in this case, seeing people being nude rather than clothed, increased attention. And again, as you can imagine, there's a strong evolutionary value in paying attention to sexual or suggestive content. And then the final thing that grabs our attention is contrast. So this is basically movement, noise. If you think about jangling keys in front of a baby, how transfixed the baby will be. I did an analysis, it's not scientific by any means, but a blog had watched every Michael Bay film and counted the number of explosions. And I just tallied that against box office receipts. The more explosions, the more people watch the film. So the point I'm making here is that noise, movement, etc. will grab attention. Moving images are more memorable than static images, for example, according to this study. So that's why on the tube, on the London Underground, having video ads next to the escalators is more effective than having just static print ads. But surprise can be a bit more advanced than just movement and noise. It can also be more banana in nature. For example, then I said banana when you probably weren't expecting me to, and that grabbed your attention because it was surprising in a cognitive way. On this study, they found that when there are incongruous words like that, there's a spike in brain activity as the brain tries to work out what's going on. So people will pay attention to stuff that's new or a bit weird or unexpected or bizarre. For example, Jackpot Joy floated a big rubber duck down the Thames, and that increased awareness for the brand by 10% in London. So these are the ways you grab attention, and then how do you engage people and get them thinking about your message? Well, moving from surprise then to curiosity. If we see something new that we can't quite work out what it is, or we want to solve a puzzle, we'll pay attention to it. So if you show a baby a new pattern it hasn't seen before, it'll be transfixed. And it will keep staring at it and eventually habituate and lose interest. But if you turn the pattern on its side, in this case to turn squares into diamonds, it will become transfixed again because it's something new to kind of figure out. So if I bring this to life a little bit, what do you do with a finished crossword? So let's say it's the metro in the morning and you finish the Sudoku or crossword. What would you do with it? You probably wouldn't keep it. You probably wouldn't treasure it forever. Once it's done, and you'll just throw it away probably because there's no more interest. It doesn't captivate you anymore. It's done. There's nothing to solve. An example that people can get to grips with a bit more quickly, in my experience, is what would you do if you had a partner who became boring or predictable? Well, people say they throw it away or move on. So something needs to have kind of a mystery and intrigue and something not quite able to figure out for us to be sustained in our interest and engagement. A nice example is those 2 Malaysian Airlines flights that that were downed in a very short period from one another. Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, there's much more interest for it because it just completely disappeared. The other one was sadly shut down over Ukraine. There was wreckage, we know what happened, but the one that disappeared was still interested in it. Much the same way people still care about Madeleine McCann and Jack the Ripper, things like that. The Lindbergh baby, because it's a surprise. It's a mystery. We can't figure it out. So we really like to solve those gaps in our understanding. It causes what's known as cognitive dissonance, or kind of tension when we can't. And so that motivates us to engage with messages. Something called the mystery motivator is a nice example of that. So in this study, they wanted to get children to stay in bed all night and not get out and run around. And you can see how successful the intervention was with the chart there showing the number of minutes out of bed. The intervention was having a mystery box. So they had a box full of toys, and they said, if you're good and you stay in bed, you can have a toy tomorrow, but you're not going to know what it is until tomorrow morning. Because we're really motivated, as I say, to solve gaps in our understanding and to solve riddles and mysteries. So there are a number of ways of executing this curiosity. One of them is to have like puzzles and games like this. So this is for Virgin Digital. It's visually representing band names. So you can see, say, Led Zeppelin at the top there, and the Gorillaz at the front. They have Queen, Prince, and the Sex Pistols. And so when you see this, you're immediately kind of sucked in, and you want to solve the puzzle and solve that riddle. Other ways of using curiosity are asking rhetorical questions, having teasers on the front of envelopes from subject lines, for example, using metaphor in advertising, so something that doesn't quite make sense at first, and you need to work it out. And then the other key to engaging people is fluency. So yes, it is good to use curiosity and get people thinking and engaged a bit, but remember that people are cognitive misers with limited brain power. So you do want to make things as easy as possible for people, and that's about being short, simple, and concrete. So concreteness is about things people can visualize, basically. So how effective is it to lay out a very complex immigration plan as a politician versus to say, I'm going to build a wall, because a wall is concrete, literally. It's something people can visualize, very simple. Or a more benevolent example, perhaps, is Pampers. They use the tagline, "One pack will help eradicate newborn tetanus globally." It's a real mouthful, quite abstract words in there, not very memorable. They changed it to something which is far more effective, which was one pack equals one vaccine, very concrete. Another illustration is a study that found that simple slogans in advertising, so short, concrete, emotional, are much more memorable than more complex ones. So on the simple side, you have "Raid kills bugs dead," for example. On the complex side, an example is "We're not the best because we're the oldest because we're the best." And then the final way of engaging people and getting them to digest what you're saying is through narrative, so through stories. And stories work because when you hear or read a story, the part of the brain involved in that part of the story is similar as if you were actually experiencing itself. So if you read about time, the part of the brain that deals with time lights up. So stories help people actually feel and experience your message for themselves, rather than just being kind of superficially told it. They actually experience it. And as an illustration to bring it to life, in this study with charity appeals, when they had a story about, here's an issue, let's say bears and cages, here's a conflict, talk about a particular bear and the trouble it faced and how sad that is, and then here's a resolution, here's how the donation helped. That story format resulted in higher positive emotion and also significantly a higher intention to donate. So in summary then, there are three parts to making an effective message. The third, which I didn't talk about today, is about nudging behavior. So that's about framing the message in the right way, using the right nudges and biases to influence behavior. For example, if you want people to buy your watch, imply that it's really scarce and rare and unique, and that scarcity will activate a hardwired bias where if something seems to be scarce, we want to hoard it in case it runs out. So the third thing is to incite behavior through nudges and priming and things. But what I've talked about today is how to make that message engaging in the first place. And there's two ways to do that. First of all, you have to grab attention. There's a very cluttered information marketplace out there. People have very limited attention spans, so you really need to cut through that noise. And you can do that through personalizing your messages. You can use it through the 3 Fs, through kind of primal things, faces, food, and sex. You can activate it through being emotional in images or words. And then surprising, and surprise can be about contrast, movement, and noise, but it can also be about creativity. And then once you have people's attention, you want them to actually digest what you're saying and absorb it and actually think about it actively. And there are 3 parts to that. One is curiosity, so co-creation, getting people to actually think about what you're saying by presenting rhetorical questions, metaphors, puzzles, and so on. Then there's fluency, making sure it's short and simple and concrete, not too abstract or complex. And then finally, doing all of that within the structure of a narrative or a story. So we have just under 5 minutes left. I hope you found that useful. And any questions?
Hey there, Patrick, it's Stuart. Thank you so much for that.
Yep. My pleasure.
I thought you've got quite a lot of people whose mind has been blown this morning, and that's direct feedback from the. So that is the way to open Social Day 3.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I'm just opening up the chat in the app, so I'll have a good read of that.
So we've got a couple of questions in there. So Jenna Lloyd is going to kick us off with, how do you go to grab attention when the subject matter itself isn't anything outstanding? Example, tools, car parts, and financial products.
Yeah, that's interesting because some of the best examples that I tend to talk about for this kind of stuff are Compare the Market with the Meerkat, Go Compare with the Opera Singer. People really hate that ad, but it was extremely effective. So yeah, I don't think that's any kind of barrier. If anything, that seems to be a motivator, because if you can't really differentiate from other brands in terms of your product, because it's quite functional and rational, then the only avenue left is to kind of be distinctive and grab attention and be memorable. Yeah, so I don't think there's, and then there's kind of a misconception that for certain products people think rationally, and for certain products they think emotionally. In fact, whether you're selling chocolate, politicians, insurance, houses, there are still emotion and biases involved. Maybe slightly different degrees and slightly different ways, but it's still the vast majority of what we do is emotional and kind of so-called irrational. So yeah, all of this applies to different sectors. Of course, there are some nuances. You know, if you're selling a funeral parlor, you don't want to have someone in a bikini or a cute puppy or something like that. But you can still use emotion and stories and so on. And also, this applies equally to B2B. So there was actually a presentation by Binet and Field showing that even in B2B, adverts are more effective when they focus on fame, so kind of grabbing attention and being remembered.
Brilliant stuff. And have you got any sort of social media campaigns, B2B or consumer, that have really sort of blown you away? Putting on the cognitive strings.
It's really bad, but I'm only able to think of like TV examples because I'm not a big social media user, I have to admit. Nothing's coming to mind.
What about TV? So which ones on television are the ones that have grabbed you?
Yeah, I mean, the classics, like I said, Compare the Meerkat was very effective. It was surprising. It was emotional. It was very distinct, consistent in terms of its use of assets. I think a good example to talk about is the Budweiser advert with the puppy and the horse. I don't know if you've seen that, but it was very emotional. It told a story. But key learning is that it had nothing to do with beer, so it was very ineffective, actually. So I think a takeaway from that one is that it's important to be relevant and actually talk about the product or brand you're selling in a clear way.
And Zoe Murphy's raised a really good point. We've got quite a few sort of charities and public sector marketing this morning. And she's advertising for foster carers. We've found that upset children with big eyes, etc., tend to do better than smiling children. However, people often complain about this. They say that it's upsetting or negative. Is this an example of primal response versus trained sort of response?
Yeah, absolutely. So people will pay more attention to baby schema type stuff, large heads, big eyes. Obviously, we have a negativity bias where we pay more attention to negative stimuli, whether it's upset faces over happy faces. I think something I talk about is the importance between the difference between being liked to being bought. So as I said about the Go Compare campaign, people hated it. It was very effective. So people might not like it, but if they're noticing it and if they're donating or volunteering, then that's the main thing. I think what you tend to see with charity ads is that they start off with the sad stuff and then they have a happy kind of resolution and the tone shifts towards the end. So that could be one way of mitigating that.
Okay. And Lodi has raised a good point here. So how do you stand out while not missing out on your brand messaging? Because obviously, rivers have got the power telling us that we need to put certain messaging on this stuff.
I think so. That's through making sure to be consistent in the use of distinctive assets. So the colors and the fonts, the symbol, maybe the endorsement that you use, really be consistent with that and don't kind of switch it up. But at the same time, you can do things slightly differently to be surprising. I think so. There was I can't remember if it was Audi or Lidl. I think it's Lidl, but they said I like these. I also like these. They had this campaign where they had this structure that was the same, and they showed the prices and all the assets and colors would be the same, but they changed the kind of narrative within it. So sometimes it would be two puppets saying I like this, I also like this. Sometimes it would be some kids talking. So you can be both consistent and different.
Amazing. If you were selling a bottle of wine, how would you use the format talked about?
How would you use
your formats to flog wine?
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that I didn't talk about is priming. So if you have access to the store or even where it's sold online, you can prime people to buy it. So there's a study that found that if you play classical music in a wine store, people spend more money. They buy more expensive wine. If you play French music, they buy French wine. But other than that, again, so I would, if you have access to branding, I would have clear, consistent, but also emotional, distinctive assets, logo and so on. I would create a narrative around the wine and the narrative to have kind of like an identifiable person that people can relate to, and make sure it's emotional, whether that's, again, having faces in the ads or food would be a good thing. You could pair it with delicious food in the adverts and people definitely pay attention to that. Surprising is good. But yeah, just whatever you do, be consistent and try to appeal to people's monkey brains.
So, Patrick, you haven't mentioned this in great detail, but actually, you've got your book out, Hooked, Why Cute Sells, and that's available in Amazon at the moment. I strongly recommend everybody that's actually watched this session goes and gets a copy of it because it's a fantastic book. Jade and I have both really enjoyed it. thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully you'll come back when we're face to face and join us in the flesh.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.